Welcome to the Spiritually Lit meeting. Each week, we're honored to host powerful speakers from around the world, sharing their stories, experiences, and hope with us. All of our speakers are recorded and shared through our YouTube channel so the message can reach those who need it. If you're listening to this recording and you're struggling, seeking help, or simply have a question, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can contact us anytime at spirituallylit24@gmail.com, and we promise to get back to you. Tonight, we've invited Murph to share his experience for the next 45 minutes. After that, the meeting will be open for sharing back. We will give you a sign 10 minutes before the time's up, Murph. Thank you so much for coming, making time, and making the effort to share your experience with us. And with that, I'll hand it over to you.
All right. Hello, everybody. My name's Murph, and I'm an alcoholic with alcoholism. So I'm an alcoholic, which means that I can never drink safely again. I'm an addict also, which means I can never take any mind-altering substance again, and that's forever. I cannot take another mind-altering substance safely. And now, alcoholism is a completely different thing. Alcoholism is a mind-powered disease. It's a disease of wrong thinking and bad perceptions. And this thinking, the way I thought and the way I perceived things, caused me to do things that weren't very well looked upon. So this disease hits us right between our eyes. Some of us come in here, or most of us come in here, thinking that alcohol is our problem. Alcohol is a problem, but it's not the problem. And the problem is or derives from an emotional trauma that happened to each and every one of us at some point in our lives, somewhere. Most of us early in our lives as children, had something happen to us that caused us to want to shut this off, that caused us to want to quiet that self-talking mind, that mind that says things to us, says things to me. That mind that told me that I was ugly, that no one would ever love me, that no one would ever like me, that she'll never say yes to me to dance, and on and on and on and on. And so I have a mind that was created from this trauma and an ego that runs this mind, that it was there to protect me. And the ego protects me by separating me from my fellows, from my God, and from my true self. And as alcoholics, God, in Alcoholics Anonymous or in Narcotics Anonymous or in Cocaine's Anonymous, is the main purpose of what is going to, or the main thing that's going to give us a happy, joyous, and free life. And yet we fight it. And you have to ask yourself a question: Are you really fighting God? Do you really have a problem with God, or are you fighting someone else's God, or do you have a problem with someone else's God? So, is this your conception of a God that you have a problem with? Or is it somebody else's conception of a God that you have a problem with? Is it religion's conception of God that you have a problem with? And I came to find out that I never really had a problem with God. It was your God. It was listening to other people's gods about, other people's stories about their gods, or not having God in their lives at all, or, what religion was to me. And so God became a problem that in reality wasn't a problem. And that's the crazy part of Alcoholics Anonymous, is that we get to surrender, which is an absolute must in step one. I have to surrender everything I think I know about everything in order for me to open my mind up enough to create this power in my life, to come up with a God that means something to me, a God that I can understand, a God that that I believe and trust and have faith in. And so a lot of things have to happen, prior to that. Like I said, I have to have that surrender, excuse me. I have to have that surrender, and it's an absolute must. So my emotional trauma, what got me, what started this whole ball rolling was a few things when I was a child. And I talk about these things because, and I talk about them in every share because they're so powerful to me, they're so important to me. And when it asked me in the fifth step to share the exact nature of my wrongs, um, the exact nature is the root cause. It's not the outward reaction, which is, I'm angry. I punched Fred. I screamed at my mother. I cheated on whoever. That's the outward reaction. But what was the root cause? Where did these things come from? Right. And in my life, where they came from was an event that happened when my brother walked into or knocked on the door of my house, and he had his 3-week-old baby in his arms, and he looked at my mother and he said, "Take this child. I don't want her." And he said, "If you don't take her, I'm giving her away." So heroin addiction and alcoholism took my brother to a place where he didn't want his own child. And we were to take my niece into our home, and we were to adopt her. She became my sister. I went from the baby of the family getting all the attention to the middle child getting no attention, or at least that's what my perception was. And my perception was that I wasn't loved anymore, that I wasn't loved the way I used to be loved. Why am I not getting attention anymore? And and so I don't have an understanding, that there's a new child in the house and that that child needs the attention. And so my brother left and he didn't even say goodbye to me, and he was bigger than life to me. And at the same time, my father got his dream. He bought a bar in San Francisco on the waterfront, and he became absent in my life. And so the only time I would see my father would be, when his heavy hand, um, when he hit me and when he did things like that. And he was a 6'5", 350-pound man, so he was a bulk of a man. And when he hit me, it was uh, you felt it. Let's put it that way. And and so these two events, I lost the two main father figures in my life, and so it's the mind started, the ego came, and that's where I talk about that self-talking mind began. It began to talk to me, and it began to tell me those things that I said, that I'm ugly and no one loves me, and on and on and on and on. And what happens is if I repeat these lies to myself over and over again, they start to become the truth. And so I was telling myself these lies and they became my truth. And I walked through my childhood, I walked through the early stages of my adult life with those ideas in my head, with the idea that if you loved me, you would abandon me. I pushed out everyone who loved me. I pushed out everyone who I deemed as a threat to me. And so basically, by the end of my drinking, I had pushed everyone out. But what happened was in the early stages that I went to this party one day and I took a couple drinks and something happened. My mind got quiet. I didn't hear those voices talking to me. And I looked around and I was in the middle of this party, and I was right in that moment for the first time. I wasn't in the past and I wasn't in the future. I was right in the moment, right at that party. And she did say yes to me when I asked her to dance. And all these other great things happened that night. And I chased the alcohol because I thought that the alcohol was my problem or was my solution. But the alcohol really only gave me an illusion of a solution. The problem lied way deeper than that, and I wouldn't find that out until many years into Alcoholics Anonymous. We come into Alcoholics Anonymous, and a lot of us, including myself, come to meetings to be entertained. We come to meetings to hear a speaker share these crazy stories, and we come for an entertainment value. But I don't come to find a solution, to hear the solution to my problem. And so I always talk about, the cancer patient. If you told a cancer patient that all they had to do was grow spiritually and go to meetings and their cancer would be gone, they would dive at it. And yet we have this deadly disease, or I have this deadly disease, and I had to exhaust every option before I finally got to the place where I was able to accept a God or, surrender to the fact that I needed a God. And unfortunately, it was the last option, and it doesn't have to be your last option. You don't have to be afraid of God. In our program, it's all about God, and God is mentioned 134 times in the first 164 pages of our book. That's kind of telling you that you had better, you know, surrender whatever you think and dive into this thing. Um, if I can tell you that if you dive into this thing, the only thing that can happen to you is that you have a happy, joyous, and free life. Right? Dive into it. Dive into it. My life today is so I can't cuss. Huh? Is so effing great that that I can't even begin to explain it. And it doesn't mean that I have all kinds of things and stuff like that. It means that I walk around with peace of mind, and I walk around, living a life that I don't deserve, and it's a great thing. So God was the key to my lock, right? God was the key to my lock. Once I found God, it opened up everything for me. My brother who passed away a year ago, that brother that dropped off that baby, he died in prison a year ago. He was in prison for 48 years. And he said that alcoholism is a prison that unlocks from the inside. And so all these years that I chased everything outside of me to make me happy, I am not of this world. And I don't mean that in a crazy alien way. I mean it that I don't believe in what this world tells me I need to be happy. And so I lived this life, I lived this life looking for everything outside of me to fill up that hole that was inside of me that I didn't even know was there. And money, jobs, women, everything you can think of outside, gambling, but whatever thing I found, I would become addicted to, and I would do everything I could to keep that in my life, and only to push it out every single time, because in every situation and in every relationship, I brought me with me. And it's the same thing in Alcoholics Anonymous. You can get all of the things that you think you need, right? But if your mind stays unchanged, none of these things will ever make you happy. I have this unsatisfiable mind where I get something and I become excited for a while, but then soon after that I become empty, and it doesn't fulfill what I need, and I have to search out for the next thing. So it's just a life of searching, outside of myself to try to make me happy. I was a drinker, and I was a big drinker. And I near the end of my drinking, I drank from 4 in the morning until or 5 in the morning till 2 in the morning every single day of the week. Um, I ran a bar at the end of my drinking. I lived in the bar. I did everything in the bar. I never left the bar. The only time I had people that would bring me food in. I had a kitchen in the bar. The only time I ever left it was to do laundry. And that was it. And I used to hate that. I used to hate leaving my little safe place. Um, I pushed everybody out of my life. Uh, I didn't have friends. I had acquaintances. I had drinking buddies, and I thought life was incredible. I thought I had the greatest life, there was. I used to scoff at people, that had jobs, that had to go to work from 9 to 5, and and so I lived my life and until alcohol stops working for me. And what I mean by alcohol, you'll hear that term. What I mean by alcohol stops working for me is I mean that alcohol stopped working on this. And no matter how much I drank, that thinking came back. What I thought of myself came back. And and it's the worst place you can ever be, where, alcohol, that elixir, that thing that you used for so many years, or drugs for so many years, stops working, and that mind comes back, and that talk comes back. And through events, I ended up in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I spent 2 years in Alcoholics Anonymous, going to meetings, going to tons of meetings, having commitments. Had a sponsor that I didn't use. I didn't do the steps. I had guys in the meetings that say meeting makers make it. Meeting makers make it to meetings. Meetings are extremely important, but they will not keep me sober. I had people who said commitments will keep you sober. Commitments do not keep me sober. They're important, but they do not keep me sober. My sponsor does not keep me sober. My sponsor can't make me drink, and he can't stop me from drinking. But I believed all these things, and I started to get that stuff I was talking about, that outside stuff. And before you knew it, I didn't need this program anymore. My life was wonderful. But what I didn't realize at the time was that without God, I was doomed in Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I drank again. I was out there for 2 years, and I came back again, off a terrible, terrible experience. I hated myself so much that I tried to off myself, and I ended up in the hospital. And luckily, I had gotten a union job, so I had great insurance, and they put me in a rehab. And I spent 30 days in this rehab, and I came back to Alcoholics Anonymous again. And you'd think that I had learned a lesson, but I started going to meetings again. I started doing the same things, going to meetings, having commitments, and I got to about 2 years in where I was at that place where I was gonna off myself sober, or I was gonna, find spiritual help. And I was told by this guy, you find spiritual help through the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and you need to find a person that has worked the steps, that has a God in their life, but most importantly, is living a happy, joyous, and free life outside of these rooms. You will never have a gauge to someone's sobriety by what they do and what they say in meetings. You get a gauge on someone's sobriety by what they're doing outside of these meetings, right? In their life, with their families, with their job, with their friends. And so, I pushed on, I worked the steps, and something happened in the fourth step of this time. And this was, I had been sober maybe 4 years, 3 years, or something like that when I got to the fourth step for the first time. And, I told myself going in, I would never forgive my father, and I would never forgive my brother. And God has this crazy way of messing all your plans up, right? Everything I think I know. And I got a call from that little 3-week-old baby that my adopted sister. She was like 30 years old, and she had 3 kids of her own, and she wanted to find out about her father. She wanted to find his medical background and different things like that for her children. And so she set upon a goal to find him. And I didn't care. She could do whatever she wanted to do. And I got a call about a month later, and she said, she said, I found your brother. I found my father. And he was in the 17th year of life sentence in prison. And he asked her if he could write me. And I told her, I don't care, whatever. And I would get this letter about 3 weeks later. And in the letter, he said I was wrong not to be your big brother. And I was wrong that I left you with your father. And he said a few other wrongs. And then he said, is there anything I can do to make this right? And that sounded really familiar. And he had been a member of Alcoholics Anonymous for 16 of the 17 years he was in prison. And I wrote him a nasty letter back, because I had so much hate and so much anger in me. And he wrote me another letter back and he said, I didn't do this for you. I did this for me. And I thank God that you were brought into my life because today I feel freer than I've ever felt before. I miss my brother. And throughout the years afterwards, he went from a man that I hated to a man that I inspired to be like. That's what you can get out of Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous mends relationships. It fixes us. And all you have to do is just let go and just follow the instructions. Excuse me. And I went through the rest of the steps. And I can tell you right now on page 104 or 103, which is the end of the 12th step, it doesn't say the end. There's nowhere on that page that says the end. I was so excited that I had completed the steps that I let life begin. Here we go. This is going to be freaking great. All these wonderful things are going to start happening now. And, folks, life is life, but that's okay. It's okay. There's a promise on page 100, and I talk about it all the time, that says, follow the dictates of a higher power and you will presently live in a new and wonderful world, no matter what your present circumstances. It's telling me that I can be okay through anything, if I keep God close. But I didn't go there yet. I wasn't there yet. And I went through, I went through the steps a few more times. And something didn't click. And what I was to find out later on was that hatred for my father was still there. That resentment was still there. I still had somebody to blame for all of my life and my present life. And so I drank again after 8 years, and I was out there for another 2 years, and it was the same result. I came back off a suicide attempt. I was so sick. I was in the hospital for 39 days. And I can remember when I got out of the hospital, I was walking down the hill that leads to the main street. My car wasn't with me, and leads to the main street. And the first thought that entered my mind after all of that, after the 39 days, was, I know there's a bar 1 block to the left. And I sat there for a second, and here comes God in the bus, because the bus rolled right up in front of me and the doors opened up. And I'm standing there and I have this small window. Am I going to go left to the bar, or am I going to go straight to onto the bus? And I went onto the bus. And this is where I'm going to begin to actually see what my life is about, and what I'm going to do, and what I have to do, what I need to do to have that happy, joyous, and free life. And so I start out again. I work the steps right away, and I know I needed that. I needed the relief, and this is where God was going to take me out of that darkness. This is the beginning of going from the darkness of my life into the light that God provides for me. And so I worked those steps. I was about 3 years in, and it still wasn't clicking. I still hadn't really stopped that resentment against my father, and so I went to a meeting in San Francisco. I had moved up the peninsula since then, and I went to this meeting in San Francisco, and I don't know why I went there. I know now why, but I didn't know at the time. I had no reason. I just ended up at this meeting, and this guy was speaking, and he was speaking in a way I'd never heard anyone share before. And after the meeting was over, I said, "I'm dying in Alcoholics Anonymous. Can you help me, please?" And he told me it'd be my honor to help you. There's so many of us dying in Alcoholics Anonymous, and we care so much about what you think about us, and we want to people please and do all that stuff that we are afraid to tell you. We don't tell anybody. We go to meetings, or I went to meetings and told everybody how wonderful life was. You'd ask me, "How you doing, Murph?" I'd say, "I'm fantastic. This is great. Life is beautiful." And I'd go home and I didn't want to live anymore. I hated who I was. I couldn't stop this. And that was sober. Those bedevilments on page 52. I'm going to get that page open. So if you don't know the bedevilments, it's a great description of our life, sober or drunk, both of them. And so it says we were having trouble with personal relationships. We couldn't control our emotional natures. We were a prey to misery and depression. We couldn't make a living. We had a feeling of uselessness. We were full of fear. We were unhappy. We couldn't seem to be of real help to others. Does that sound like you? Or does that sound like what your life used to be like? Because that's what my life looked like, with while I was drinking. And but my sponsor looked at me and he asked me the most important question that was ever asked of me. This guy took me to his house. I told him my story. He looked me square in the eyes and he said, "Are you ready to stop working Murph's Anonymous?" And it hit me like a punch in the gut, because if I thought about it, I had never really worked Alcoholics Anonymous the way it was outlined in that big book. I had never followed those directions. I had worked my program. If you're walking around and you're saying, "Oh, I'm working my program," stop it. Good luck, because there's only one program, and that's the program. And the program is in the steps in our book. In these steps, it's going to enable me to find a power that's going to solve my problem. And what's my problem? My thinking and my perceptions. And so that's what these steps are all about. And unless I do them as they're directed, right, I don't get what I'm supposed to get to have that spiritual awakening at the end of the steps. The most important step in Alcoholics Anonymous is the one prior to the one I'm working on. Because if I haven't gotten what it says there, it won't make any sense in the step that I'm on. And so I began to work the steps. I had that first surrender, that absolute surrender. All my ideas, everything I thought about life, everything I thought about God, everything I thought about everything, I completely gave up on. And that opened up the door and opened up my mind for the idea of God to come in. Because if I hold on to anything, I'm giving myself a reason to push God out. I can't hold on to anything. It has to be a complete surrender. You have to buy into Alcoholics Anonymous, and you have to find somebody that you have faith in that has a beautiful life that you can trust to walk you through these steps. And when I got to step 2, came to believe that a power greater than myself. Came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. It's not that you're insane. It has nothing to do with your insane life or whatever the case may be. It's the insanity as it relates to alcohol or drugs. It's the idea that that thing can solve your problem. It's the idea that that thing can make you happy, whether it's the drug, the alcohol, or anything else outside of yourself. And it brings me to a place where I understand that none of these things are going to work. And that's what I come to believe in, that none of this stuff is any longer going to work. And it's going to have to come from a power greater than myself. And so I read those bedevilments, and I read them because on page 53, so this is the greatest placed thing in the entire book, right? In page 53, it when we became alcoholics, crushed by a self-imposed crisis, we could not postpone, evade. We had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is everything or God is nothing. Either God is or God isn't. And then the question, what was my choice to be? That is a question that has to be answered. Because if my choice is that God is not everything, then all I have to do is look at page 52 and those bedevilments, that thing that I just read, and that's what your life will look like without God. It'll look like those bedevilments. But if God is everything, I no longer have to choose. I don't have to choose my girlfriend. I don't have to choose my job. I don't have to choose my friends. I don't have to choose anything. The only thing that I have to do is the work in front of me. And then God gets the rest. God gets the solution. God gets the problem. And that takes a leap of faith. And it's not easy, right? It takes practice. But it brings me to the place where I'm going to ask God to take care of my thinking and my actions in step 3, right? Before I make a decision at this time, before I make a decision, I need to go to God first. And then I need to go to another human being to run that thought by him. And this is an early sobriety, because later on in the steps, it tells you that God gave you a brain to use. At that point, later on, you're going to have a brain, if you've worked these steps, that you can trust now. I don't have to go to a sponsor with things that I'm about to do, right? I don't have to run it by someone else. I can. I mean, I can ask for your input on something, but that's not going to alter the decision that I eventually make. I didn't come here to have other people telling me how I should walk through life, right? I have a God that I can walk through life with and that I totally trust with everything, but it takes practice. I can't expect years of doing things the wrong way, of thinking and perceiving things certain ways, and expect it to happen overnight, right? I got to give time. I've got to allow it to play out, to see where it's going to go. And I got into the 4th step with a God. See, in the 2nd step, it asks me to start seeking. And it gives me the how and the where I'm going to find God. How am I going to find God? By searching diligently, by seeking fearlessly. And where will I find God? Deep within myself. It takes work on my part. I had to start reading material. I had to start reading AA stuff. I had to start reading AA books. There's a lot of fun books to read. I would go on YouTube and I'd bring up spiritual speaker and I'd just go eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and I'd pick one. And I'd listen to them in my morning practice. And I would listen to their ideas. And can I incorporate this into my God? Because my sponsor had me take 2 sheets of paper. On one sheet of paper, what would God be? What would God not be if there was a God? And on the other sheet of paper, what would God be if there was a God? And so I got to look at that, right? And on that one sheet of paper of what God would be, there were only 5 things. Love will take care of me, wants me to have things in abundance, will take care of my family. And on the other sheet of paper, it was freaking litany of stuff that God would not be if there was a God. And I got to look at that with my sponsor. And he put his arm around me and he said, throw that damn thing away. He goes, now you have the groundworks, the foundation for your God. And over the years, that sheet of paper now is filled up on one side and over halfway filled on the other side. Through the years, my God has grown because I've continued to seek and I've continued to search. It sounds like it's, I don't know, it sounds like it's like, oh my God, I got to do that. Oh, that's so hard. Why do I got to do, oh my God, that sounds like so much work. It's not. It becomes a working part of your life. You don't even know you're doing it because you realize the great benefits that you're going to get from it. And so I went into the 4-step on God's will this time and not Murph's will. Murph, if you're finding yourself afraid of the 4th step, it means you're going into the 4th step on your own will. Because if you're going on God's will, there is no fear in the 4th step. And I'm going to do it thorough and I'm going to do it honestly. And I came to my father, that man I said that I would never forgive, ever. My sponsor looked at me and goes, how about this time, instead of looking at what your father did to you, because you've gone through that so many times with everybody who'll listen, right? Why don't we find out what happened to your father to make him the man he was? And I asked God for help. And I went to all my relatives and I started asking questions. And I found out that in World War II, my father's job was to go into the prisoner of war camps and get the Jewish prisoners out. And what my father saw damaged him. And my uncle said that when he got back, he was not the same man. He saw atrocities that no human being should ever have to see. When he was at a picnic with his first wife, she got stung by a bee in the throat. It swelled in instead of out. She suffocated and died right in front of him at this picnic. And my brother was there at 5. He was 5 years old. He lost his dream, that bar, and we lost our home in bankruptcy. And he was an alcoholic. And I found out all this stuff about him. And I had hated a man for 40 years and didn't even know his story. My perceptions of my father changed in that minute. What I thought about him changed in that minute. I always had clothes. I always had food. I always was, he couldn't give himself to me. He was never able to do that. He never said he loved me ever in my lifetime. He wasn't able to. And so I had empathy for a man I had hated my entire life. And it was because I had thrown my self-centeredness aside to find out what was going on with another human being. Where was he at? Where were they at? And I was able to get relief from that resentment. And I can remember looking around, perhaps I was looking all around because I'm waiting for something, because there's nothing there. There's no more hatred. There's no more anger. And I walked out, I floated out after that 5th step, right? I had found out the exact nature of my wrongs. It came from those emotional traumas as a child. And that because I felt abandoned and because I felt unloved, right, I started to act out in certain ways. And that each one of my character defects, all of them that I had then and that I have now, derive from that. That 4th step in the 4th column is one of the most important things in the book, my part in it, because that 4th column is going to take me through step 5, through step 6, through step 7, through step 8, and through step 9. What am I afraid of? Where am I self-centered? Where am I self-seeking? And where am I dishonest in every one of my relationships on that 4th step list? And all of a sudden, it was all the same. I was afraid of the same things, all derived from that childhood trauma. I was dishonest about the same things, pleasing you. I was self-seeking about the same things, looking for something from you for what I did for you. And I was self-centered about freaking everything. Everything. It was all about me. And I got to 6 and 7. And the importance of that step 3 comes into fruition in step 7. Because when I became willing to turn my thinking and my actions over to the care of God, now I'm humbling myself to God, and I'm about to put all of this into play. Step 6 and 7 is short for a reason in the big book. It's there, it's short because it's none of my business. Step 6 and 7 is none of my business. It's God's business. You can, I'm not going to put down anybody for what they do. You do what you want, but you can read Drop the Rock. You can read the 12 and 12 on step 6 and 7, right? It's too much information. What it's telling me here is that all I have to do is what's in front of me, and God will have the rest. Give the solution to God. I'll give you an example too, because we tend to label things good and bad, and we tell oh, this is good or this is bad. I know everything. I play God in those things. But imagine going to get a job and you're like you know the company up and down, and you go into that interview, you answer every question, you nail it, and the guy says you didn't get, or the woman says you didn't get the job. Oh, Jesus, God hates me. Oh my God, I'm never going to get a job. And on and on and on and on. And we think that this is the worst thing that could have happened. And then 6 months down the road, you get a job. And it turns out to be the greatest job you've ever had in your life. And you look back and you go, oh, that's why I didn't get that job. God had something much better for me down the road, right? His decision for me not to get that job was the perfect one. And if I'd have just left it alone, I would have, I wouldn't have had so much misery and pain and the months that follow thinking about why I didn't get the job and how I'm a loser and whatever the case may be. That's an untreated alcoholic. And I got to the 9th step. And in the 9th step, I made all of my amends face to face, unless I could not find the person, period. And I say that because we can make excuses. Oh, I think it's going to hurt them, so I'm not going to make the face to face. Or, oh, I think it's going to hurt myself, so I'm not going to make the face to face. I'll give you an example. I went to this guy's place, and I knew we were going to blows. I knew it. I knew the minute that door opened, I had my right hand cocked because I knew he was gonna come, he was gonna be flying at me, and this was gonna be bad. That's my thinking. That's what I thought. And I got there, and he opened the door, and he stood there looking at me, and I told him I was an alcoholic, and that part of my recovering from alcoholism is to make right my wrongs. And I told him what I did, and I told him I was wrong to hit him, and I told him, is there anything I can do to make this right? And he stood there and he looked me dead in the eye and he goes, you know what? I was an asshole back then. I probably deserved getting hit. He goes, and I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. He had been a member for 5 years, and he made an amends to me. And we've had this amazing relationship ever since. I would have never gotten that if I'd have written a letter or if I'd have done something else. The beauty in that is so amazing, and the freedom that you get from each one of those amends is blow away. The 10th step, I walk through life every day, right? Every day. It's 24 hours. That's it. That's all I have to worry about. I get a daily reprieve contingent upon my spiritual, I say, connection. You ever ask yourself what that reprieve is from? I never did. I finally asked, what's the reprieve from? The reprieve is from your thinking. I get a reprieve daily from my thinking based on my connection with God. I get this freedom because there's not all this stuff rattling on in my head. Pause when agitated or doubtful. We know about pausing with that when we're agitated. How many of you pause when you're doubtful about something and step back and talk to God about it? I started to do that. I started to watch for fear, for self-centeredness, for self-seeking, for dishonesty. It says when these crop up. It doesn't say if they crop up. It says when they crop up. I'm a human being. I will never be so spiritual as I stop being human. I'm a human being. I'm going to make mistakes. Mistakes are portals to discovery. That I can find something and see something in everything that I do. Right? If I just sit there, and I'll talk about the 11th step real quick. If I sit there at night and look back at my day and see where I fell short, and see where I brought something to this world, where I was loving, see these things, bring them to your conscious, to a conscious level, so I can see these, so that God can either take it away or leave it with me, depending on its usefulness to you, my fellows, and my God. The vultures, my lineage of the vultures. And the vultures are on your bedpost, and they're just sitting there staring at you in the morning, waiting for you to open up your eyes. And right when you open up your eyes, hey, let's talk about how unappreciated you are at work. Hey, let's talk about how the girlfriend disrespected you last night. Hey, let's talk about this and let's talk about that. And before you can get your foot off the bed, you're deep into self and deep into thought. And if I don't surrender and ask God in the moment my eyes open, I get into the shower with Murph. And that's not good. You don't want to get in the shower with Murph. I want to get in the shower with God, right? I want to get in the shower free of those thoughts, free of that stuff. I don't want to carry Murph into my day, right? I want to carry God into my day. And I seek through prayer and meditation to improve the conscious contact with God. Prayer and meditation, not prayer or meditation. It's prayer and meditation. You having trouble meditating? It's because it's not important enough to you. And that's it. If it's not important enough to me, I'll find an excuse. If it's important enough to me, I'll find a way. I've got to make that important to me. Go to YouTube again. YouTube's great for alcoholics. Go to YouTube again. YouTube meditation. Practice for 30 seconds a day, then for 2 minutes, then for 5 minutes. Look at different meditations. Find one that works for you and start listening to God. Because God will talk to you through your intuition. God talks to us through intuitive thoughts. I can't have an intuitive thought if I'm already thinking. If I'm thinking, that intuitive thought is not going to come to me. I get to a quiet place and I listen for God. I listen for those answers. And but that 11th step in the morning, right? The vultures and starting your day off with Murph. I can surrender each day, or right every day on awakening when my eyes open. I do it every single morning. I've been doing it every morning for 13 or 14 years. Every single morning without fail. You don't get a reprieve from your 11th step if you're on vacation. You don't get one, right? I need to make time for the most important thing in my life. And so I ask God I ask God to direct my thinking, right? Let it be divorced from self-pity, from anger, from resentment, from fear. I ask that God walks with me, right? Please walk with me through my day. Please stay in my consciousness, because there's gonna be a time where where you or no power is going to be able to stop you from that first drink. It's going to have to be from your relationship with God. And I, God is my man. God is, I walk around, people in Burlingame on Burlingame Avenue probably look at me strange because I'll be walking, I'll just go, "What's up, God? What's going on? What's going? Talk to me. Let me talk about what's happening right now. Let me talk about this stuff, right?" And then I just walk with him, and I ask him questions, and and God can be whatever you want God to be for you, but it's got to be God, right? It's got to be God. It can't be an inanimate object. Our book says it has to be God. And when I go to bed at night, God, this time just keeps on getting bigger and bigger. It's going the other way. Before I go to before I better go to bed at night, right? I have to, before I retire, I have to look back at my day, right? I've got to look back at my day. I've got to ask, where was I afraid today? Where was I self centered today? Where was I self seeking today? Where was I dishonest today? Because in and of myself, I can't see these things a lot of the time. And they'll build and build and build until, right? So I have to look back and ask myself those questions. And if I was afraid today, I have to ask myself, what was the thought that preceded that fear? What was the thought that preceded that anger? Right? I need to get to the exact nature of that wrong, of what I did in everything that I do. And the exact nature, like I said, is not the outward reaction. It's deeper than that. It goes further than that. There's a place where you'll hear people in all different forms of 12-step programs, but in AA, you'll hear people saying, "Yeah, it's the first drink that gets you drunk." But that's not what it says. It says it's the thought that precedes the first drink that gets you drunk. It's, oh, what made me put whiskey in milk, right? What made me think that that was going to be okay? Coat your stomach and do whatever. That's going to be okay. It's always the thought that precedes the action that causes the problem. And if I can see things and I can start getting a hold of my thought life, which is the problem of an Alcoholics Anonymous, I can recover. He said something also that was really important. He said, "Murph," he goes, "you got to stop trying to create a better past." I would go back and I would say, only if this was different, only if this was happening, only if my father had, gone to my sports events and done this and that, and I would just go back to the past, and I would try to make it better. I'd go through this fantasy life trying to, in my mind, figure out how great life would have been if something would have been different. And he just said, you got to stop trying to create a better past. He said, look back over your life honestly. Now, can't you see how the loving hand of God has brought a happy ending to many events that seemed like a tragedy at the time? And if you do that one day, just give yourself about 10 minutes or 15 minutes and go back through your life and look at something that you thought was the worst thing that could have ever happened that ended up being a happy ending, that God put his hand, in. When I'm untreated, one thought turns into 10, right? I have to stay treated. I have to stay treated with God. And the beautiful thing is that I get to work with other alcoholics. The joy in my life is watching another alcoholic get better. And it's something that, you can't miss it. To see the eyes of another man light up, to see him turn around, to have that spiritual awakening. And so that spiritual awakening is a complete shift in the way I see things and the way I perceive things. And I had that. And my life has changed since then. I love Murph. I love me. I love my life so much. And it doesn't mean that I have a lot. It means I love what I have and I'm content with it. Thank you so much for having me here today. God led me out of the darkness into a light that I hope all of you get to experience. It was just a beautiful thing. Thank you.